Okay, so now we're going to be talking about measuring and how we can use measuring to really get those results that we want. Measuring is a little more complicated than pulling out the tape measure or jumping on the scales. So we're going to have a look at each part of measuring so that we can totally understand how it all works together. Now, to start off with, it's important to know that no one measurement tells the whole story. So we're going to talk about body fat percentage, measurements in inches or centimeters, weighing in, doing some photos, and also looking at some other health factors that are very, very worthwhile in terms of measuring them over time. So let's have a look at body fat percentage. Now, body fat percentage is the most accurate representation of your body changes, and it's much more accurate than weight alone. The most accurate way of measuring body fat percentage is by using a DEXA or a BOD-POD scan. Now, if you're interested in one of these, you can easily find a location, hopefully nearby to you, by Googling DEXA or BOD-POD along with a city name that's close by. Now, if you're going to use a DEXA scan, make sure you ask about body fat analysis and not bone density, as these are also used for osteoporosis scans. Now, the next most accurate measurement for body fat percentage, if you don't go with one of these scans, is a caliper measurement. And this is really best done by a professional. Now, you could try a local gym or a local fitness trainer, but make sure that every time you get measured that you use the same person, because everyone has a slightly different technique. Using calipers to be measured basically helps someone estimate with a high level of accuracy what your body fat percentage is by using some mathematical formulas. So again, it's important to use the same formula as well as the same person each time. Now, a couple of notes on body fat percentage. Please don't worry about using body fat scales or using any handheld measuring devices that you might find. They tend to be incredibly inaccurate, and even drinking one whole glass of water could change their readout by perhaps 2% or 3%. So the best thing to do is use a caliper measurement or use one of the DEXA or BOD-POD scans. Now, the next thing we want to look at is measurements, and that's measurements in centimeters or inches, depending on where you live. Now, it's important to use the same locations on your body every time. And it's also important to use a log of those measurements and look at that over a number of months. Now, in that log, you want to have the date, what site on your body, the number of inches or centimeters, and of course you can either use a handwritten log or a spreadsheet if you prefer. Now, the sites that we're going to measure are your mid-upper arm, halfway between your elbow and your shoulder, the mid-upper thigh, halfway between your hip and your knee, mid-calf, halfway between your knee and your heel, at your belly button, at your hips, and around your shoulders. Now, by measuring each of these locations over a number of weeks or a number of months, you should start to see some trends developing. And certain measurements that are included there are areas where there's a lot of body fat deposited. And those areas, for example, are around your belly button and on your thigh. Now, the next thing you do is a weigh-in. And I know that everyone gets on the scales. Some people get on the scales every day, and some people avoid it and only get on the scales every few months. Now, the key is that the weigh-in is not the be-all and end-all of measuring. Weight is only one measurement, and really it doesn't tell us a lot of what we need to know. But it is one measurement to include, and it's one that we want to look at over a number of months and check if there's any trends. So I want you to use the same scales, and I want you to use the same room and the same kind of flooring as well, because sometimes different kinds of floors or different positions on floors can cause scales to read different numbers. Now, my recommendation is to weigh only one time per week. Please don't weigh every day, because the human body simply doesn't change that quickly, or at least it doesn't change in a lasting way that quickly, and you could actually drive yourself crazy checking your weight every day. So pick one day of the week and use the same time as well on that day each week, and then you'll actually be able to check your trend over a number of weeks and months. Now, one little trick that I like to suggest is that if you can, switch your scales to using a foreign weight. And that means that if you normally weigh yourself in pounds, you might be able to switch over to weighing yourself in kilograms, and vice versa. Now, the best thing about this is that you totally lose any mental attachment you have to particular numbers that you see come up on the scale. And I think this is a really, really healthy way to simply use the weigh-ins as one point of data collection rather than as some source of happiness or sadness or frustration for that matter. And once again, if you do have body fat percentage on your scales, just ignore it because it's just too inaccurate to rely on. Now, the next thing we like to keep a record of is our appearance. And the best way to do that is to use a photo, and probably use a photo every week, maybe every month. Now, the key to taking good photos and actually seeing results changing in front of you is to use the same place at the same time with the same lighting. And for this reason, I suggest a room in your house and to take the photo at night so you're using the same artificial lighting every single time. I also want you to use the same camera, and I want you to use the same zoom level on that camera too, because certain camera lenses can actually distort if they're zoomed in or out. Also, be sure that you have the date, and if you're relying on your digital camera to give you the date on the file, double check the first file to make sure the date is right, so you know exactly when it was taken. Now, there's no need to share these photos, but one day you might want to, so make sure you keep them stored all in one place, whether that's one folder on your computer or whether it's on one of those little USB thumb drives. And always be sure to hold yourself in the same relaxed or flexed way so that there's no difference between how you're actually holding your body. But what I want you to do is keep focused on the mental image of what you want to look like. Don't dwell on these photos. They really are just a record, and you may want to refer back to them at some point in the future. Now, the other things that we measure, maybe they're a little bit less scientific, but they're also very, very important. And so if you download the info sheet, which is the measurement log, then you'll see that I also include sleep quality, energy level, focus concentration, and happiness as things that you want to rate on a 1 to 10 scale every week or two. Now, by doing this, hopefully you'll start to see a positive trend happening over a few weeks and then over a few months. It's difficult to remember back a few months ago and think if you were sleeping well or not. And it's also difficult to remember back and think about how your focus or your concentration was. So by keeping a record this way, you'll actually be able to see if this new lifestyle is actually helping you in ways that aren't that obvious. Now, some other things you may also want to include on your measurement log could be blood pressure, cholesterol, triglycerides, or other specific factors from illnesses or ailments that you have. Now, obviously, some of these factors need to be measured by a healthcare professional, and for that reason, you might only log them once every 2 months, or perhaps even once every 3 months. So I'll leave it up to you as to what else you include on the measurement log. So that completes what we're going to measure, and I want you to have a think about for a minute about what's really important to you in terms of your goals, and remember that measuring is just one way of checking if you're making progress towards those goals. Remember that your health and how you're feeling and other results that are coming in your life are just as important as a number on a scale or the measurement of your thigh. Now, if you keep that in mind, I think you'll make great progress, and you'll also be able to use these measurements as a great tool to see how you're doing.